everyone. This is Jewish Talk, coming to you live from Nassau Community College. And we're on 90.3 WHPC, also streaming on the iHeart and the iTunes app. This program is later archived on Spreaker.com. Wherever you go, you can find us. So hi there, my name is Rabbi Perl. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. People ask me, why do I keep on saying that? Because, you know, we can be heard at any time of the day and right on this station. If you miss us, tell your friends. If you miss us in the morning, we can catch you. You can catch us right at 11 p.m. on Sunday night. And we welcome you. Please tell your friends. And we know that more and more people are joining us each and every Sunday morning and throughout the week. And we welcome you. We appreciate your presence. Please tell your friends that if you cannot get us on the radio, we can be heard on nccradio.org, right online. Go onto your computer and you can hear us loud and clear right on this station. And of course, those who would like to see my punim, you're welcome to go to Facebook Live, Anshul Pearl, my name, or Facebook Live at WHPC. And so in honor of next week, of course, we just have so many shopping days left to Rosh Hashanah, I thought we would talk about an important aspect of personality of ourselves. And that, of course, is as we prepare for Rosh Hashanah and the New Year, how can we control our thoughts? We're looking to strengthen our relationship with Hashem, preparing for all the blessed, wonderful, good year ahead for everybody. May we all be blessed with a very happy, healthy, and sweet new year. So what about our minds, though, our thoughts? So I'd like to develop that idea in different fashions, different ways, and help us to see exactly how a person can actually learn to control their negative thoughts, or anything, jealous thoughts, anything which is inappropriate, and bring us to a good place in our lives. And I want to say, if you post your comment or your hello on our Facebook page, we are more than happy to recognize you. And that indeed brings us to Eitan Kelshevsky, all the way from New Jersey. Shows you that the station can be heard in New Jersey. And to hello to Miriam Odell David, and to Linda Zellickson and Denise Zellickson, and to everybody out there. First, I want to share with you that there's a psychologist called Jonathan Smallwood. He set out to study the mind wandering about 25 years ago. And many of his peers thought that this was, how are you going to, study mind wandering? How could one hope to investigate these spontaneous and these unpredictable thoughts that crop up in a person's mind, and when we stop paying attention to their surroundings and whatever tasks they have? Seemed to be a waste of time. Thoughts that couldn't be linked to any measurable outward behaviors. How could this Dr. Smallwood make a study on this kind of subject? Well, this Dr. Smallwood, now at Queen's University in Ontario, Canada, he forged ahead. He didn't care. And he used as his tool a downright, rather tedious computer task that was intended to reproduce the kinds of lapses of attention that cause us to pour milk into someone's cup when all they asked for was black coffee. And he started out by asking study participants a few basic questions to gain insight into when and why minds tend to wander, and what subjects they tend to wander towards. I make a study every Shabbos. I look around when I give my sermon in the synagogue, and I have a live study going on of looking around and seeing how people's mind wander. One is thinking about when is the Kiddush. The other wants to know when is Rabbi going to end. After a while, he began to scan the participants' brains as well, to be able to catch a glimpse of what was going on in there during that person's mind wandering. Now, Smallwood learned that unhappy minds tend to wander in the past, while happy minds often ponder the future. He also became convinced that wandering among our memories is actually crucial to help prepare us for what is yet to come. Though some kinds of mind wandering, such as dwelling on problems that can't be fixed, may be associated with depression, this doctor now believes mind wandering is rarely a waste of time. It is merely our brain trying to get a bit of work done when it is under the impression that there isn't much else going on. So, from this point, we could ask ourselves, is mind wandering the same as daydreaming? Or what would you say are the difference between mind wandering and daydreaming? Now, he says it's a similar process used in a different context. When you're on vacation and you've got lots of free time, you might say you're daydreaming about what you'd like to do next. But when you're under pressure to perform, you experience the same thoughts as mind wandering. Okay, this was my little introduction, and I'm going to share with you 2 questions that came across our desk, one from a lady and one from a man. The one from the man is going to be talking about, he presented his question about he has some horrible thoughts in his mind. He's been thinking about doing criminal activity. But the first one I want to share with you comes from a lady who says that she's happily married to a wonderful man, but for some reason, she finds herself sometimes thinking about other men and the people she dated before marrying and meeting her husband. I know I will never act out any of these thoughts, she says, but I feel terribly guilty for thinking them. Is there anything I can do to stop this? Very sincere question. I took it very seriously. I did my research, and I want to share with you an answer. Firstly, you are not alone in the difficulty that you describe. But what is amazing to hear is that you are so very aware that it is a problem. The fact that this person feels bad about it is actually good. Many people are quick to write off these thoughts as something that is not important, especially if there's no real chance of acting on it. However, thoughts are unbelievably important, whether or not they actually manifest into action, as they're so powerful in their raw form. This is so much the case that we are taught that there are 3 main times when a couple is not allowed to be intimate, outside of the times that apply to couples in general. What are these three moments, 3 times? This is either if either partner is drunk, if the couple is contemplating divorce, or if either partner is thinking about someone else. This third aspect seems very strange, that there could be a law regarding how we think, because ideally we are not sharing these thoughts with our partner, but yet we are shown that we are most definitely responsible for what we think, and even more importantly, that we have the power and the ability to control our thoughts and to overcome our thoughts. The only way we can be told that something is not allowed based on our thoughts is if we have the ability to change the situation. And that would apply to all the things that the Torah speaks about. We can't do this, we can't eat that. It's obviously, if the Torah says we can't do certain things, we are able to control ourselves. And the same applies with negative, these kinds of thoughts. So here is your real question. How does one rid oneself of improper thoughts? For starters, it is very important that you realize how destructive they can be. And hopefully just knowing this will make you that much quicker to try to fill your head with something else. For the most part, we're only able to think about one thing at a time, which means if you're thinking about something you shouldn't be thinking about, the first thing to do is to replace the thoughts with something else. Sometimes this is easier to do. Other times, there's no other thought that can actually compete with the intensity of this inappropriate thought. If this is the case, try to find something to do that requires complete concentration so that you cannot just let your mind wander. Try building something, or answering emails, or calling somebody, listening to my program. Something that will ensure that you stop thinking about someone in your past. If you think that you have a lot of free time on your hands, and that you keep lapsing into negative thought processes, try doing something that will make you feel fulfilled and productive. For example, start volunteering or spending time at the hospital or at an old age home. If you are busy thinking about others, you won't be able to start thinking about yourself and your past. Now, lastly, I would recommend trying to actively not only think, but verbalize how happy you are with your husband and how much you love him. Try to make yourself focus on how fortunate you are to be with him and how happy he makes you. Ideally, you will be able to eventually get to the point where the only man you think about is your husband. Until that time comes, you want to ensure, though, that if you start to think of anyone other than your husband, that you take yourself out of that headspace and into another situation so that your thoughts can be redirected. Now, obviously, ladies and gentlemen, this applies for a man and a woman equally with these suggestions. Now, I want to go on to the next response that we had from an individual whose mind wanders off and imagines themselves committing crimes. And the person writes, I've always felt there is nothing wrong with these thoughts because I do not actually follow through and commit the crime. What do you think, Rabbi? Rabbis don't think. They just talk from both sides of their mouth. Joking. So what's the answer, my friends? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. Okay, wrong. This is a talk show. I forgot. Though thought is the most difficult part of the person to control. Everybody agrees. Our thought process is constantly at work, and thoughts seem to enter our minds at random. Happens. Oh, comes in, falls in. But it's important to remember that every action is preceded by a thought. For example, one does not commit adultery without thinking about it and planning it in detail. Trying to control one's thoughts is clearly a good start to one's quest in becoming a better person. Let me share with you what the Talmud says. It's amazing. It's mind-boggling. It says the following: thoughts of sin are more difficult than the sin itself. Hello? What does that mean? Thoughts of a sin are more difficult than the sin itself? This means, in a certain manner, a sinful thought is more damaging than the sin itself. How could this be? Let me break it down. There are two components to a person's wrongdoing: the negative action and its effect that we see and feel in our physical world. That's number one. But there's another side to this. there's a damaging spiritual effect that the wrongdoing has on the one who does it. So we tend to think in terms of the first way. We take, listen, the facts on the ground, we're living in the physical world, and therefore my negative action, that's terrible. Wow. I can see it, the world is changed by it. Thoughts, though, are unseen, cannot be judged. No one is convicted of thinking about stealing. The same would be in the case in a court of Jewish law. Nonetheless, my friends, from the perspective of the soul, of the neshama, there is something about the sinful thought that is especially painful. Maimonides, the great Maimonides, Rambam, puts it this way: the capacity to think comes from humankind's unique spiritual standing. Therefore, to use thought for sin is to sin by means of the noblest part of yourself. Let me repeat that. The capacity to think comes from the humankind's unique spiritual standing. Thinking powerful thoughts, just the ability to think, really reflects who you as a human being are. Therefore, to use that thought, that part of ourselves for sin, is really, in a sense, sinning by the means of the noblest, the best part of oneself. Let me put it simply. Action is something we all share in common with all other creatures. We can use it negatively, just as an animal can. But corrupting our minds, which is unique to human beings, hurts that much more. We have taken something so high, so powerful, and brought it down so low. According to Chabad philosophy, the soul has 3 garments, 3 ways of expressing itself. What are they? Through thought, through speech, and through action. I want you to know that I get notes, and I want to thank Kim for helping me. We get notes both on my Facebook and also the Facebook of WHPC. I want to say good morning to Rosemary Hoffman. Thank you so much. And to everybody, Jean Marie, and those who are joining us, and thank you so much for your comments. So again, we express ourselves in 3 ways, three garments: thought, speech, and action. Thought is the most spiritual of those garments. This is intimately connected with the soul, with your soul, neshama, and shares some of the same characteristics. Why do I say that? What's the connection between the thought and one's soul? Thought is constant. And guess what? The soul is constantly connected to the body. So there's something very, very uniquely connected to this consistency of thought, because it's connected to the soul, which is also very consistently connected to the body. Thought stays within the person, just as the soul remains in part of the person as long as he or she is alive. So sinful thoughts will blemish the soul in a more spiritual place than even a sinful act. Because the thought is that connected. That's the first step away from the soul. A sinful deed is an external expression of the soul. But the effects of a negative thoughts are deeper and far-reaching. Within this mind, we can appreciate now, and what I just mentioned earlier on, the Talmudical statement, thoughts of a sin are more difficult than the sin itself. Conquering one's thought is an integral part of Judaism. But it's certainly not easy to control all of our thoughts all the time. It may take years. It may even an entire lifetime to master it. I share with you from Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, the founder of the Chabad movement, whose birthday we celebrated last week. In his famous Tanya, he provides tools to help overcome negative thoughts and discusses the incredible pleasure we give God when we attempt to master our psyche. So again, how do I rid myself of inappropriate thoughts. The most powerful tool in all of these matters is perhaps the most counterintuitive. It's called Hesach Hadas, also known as think about something else. Think about something else. I know it sounds stupid, but this is how it works. When you fight against your own thoughts, you only engrave them deeper into your neurons. It's something like struggling against quicksand, which serves only to dig you in deeper and deeper. So as long as you are chastising yourself for your thoughts, trying to determine where they came from, trying to convince yourself more and more how bad they are for you, and even just remarking to yourself, why is this happening to me? Guess what? All you are actually doing is burning those thoughts further into the woodwork of your mind. That's why many people tell me when I start to think, they say they smell the wood burning. You need to do two things, dear friends. And that is, number one, recognize that you and I, in 99.9999% of the male gender, are beasts of prey with oversized brains. It's no wonder that we react to a woman much the same as we do to a steak. That's how we were designed. The brain software is supposed to kick in and modify that. But sometimes the hardware just gets wacko out of control. So there's nothing to be shocked about or to chastise yourself about when those hormones start flowing and those thoughts start bubbling. On the contrary, this is how the Alter Rebbe explains. You should be delighted that you had an opportunity to do battle with your Yetzer Hara, with your animal desires, and you've won, because you still have not committed adultery or any other similar such sin. For more than this, I refer you to chapter 27 of the Tanya. It can be found online. And if you really have a problem finding it, I will give you the personal cell number of Dr. Gary Spitz, because he is an expert in all the chapters of Tanya. We have the text online, but go out there and you'll see what I'm sharing with you is a précis or is a brief overview of how the Alter Rebbe explains we should overcome negative thoughts. But going on, number two, you need to have something else ready in your mind to think about. If you're not learning, you're sinking. Always have some ideas in Torah ready at hand to think about. Memorize as much as you can. When I was a student in the Lubavitch Yeshiva in Paris, many years ago, they encouraged us, they tested us on knowing 14 chapters of Tanya. Was it 14 or 12? Maybe 12 chapters of Tanya by heart. Or we were encouraged to study Mishnah by heart, so that when we went in the street, or we were going anywhere, or in between, whatever, we would always have some Torah thoughts in our mind to memorize them as much as we can, so that when negative thoughts start showing up, whatever it may be, you quickly have this reservoir of memorized Torah thoughts. Listen to tapes, learn stuff that engages and fascinates you. You know what? Let me put it this way. An empty mind is an open door to empty thoughts. So a person should keep their brain stuffed, like stuffed derma, with good thoughts. I want to share with you what the Mozditzer Rebbe did to strengthen his mind, to keep his mind focused. You won't believe what I'm about to share with you. I take this opportunity to thank everybody who comes, who joins us, who spends time listening to our program each and every week. We appreciate this. The feedback, the comments mean so much to us. So what did the Mozditzer Rebbe, who was a great Hasidic leader, he had composed many magnificent Hasidic songs. In his old age, he had to undergo an operation. Unfortunately, he had been weakened by his ailment, and the doctors were afraid to give him any anesthesia. They did not know if he would wake up, but they knew that without the operation, God forbid, he would not live. What should they do? They asked the Rebbe himself, and he offered a unique suggestion. What did he suggest under these circumstances? He would compose a Hasidic song. When the doctors would see that he's deeply engrossed in the melody, he's totally involved, then they would start the surgery. And this is what happened. He composed a song. While they were performing the surgery, he was singing the song, and he felt absolutely no pain. We have that song today. I don't know it at this moment. It has 36 stanzas because the operation took quite some time. But his mind was totally focused on the song. His thought process was somewhere else, to such a point that he would not actually feel the pain of his operation. Now, this is not a story about a Rebbe and a miracle. Yes, it happened to a Rebbe, and he was well known for his miracles. But this particular event that I share with you was natural, because he was concentrating so deeply on the song, he was not aware of anything else, and he therefore felt no pain whatsoever. Okay, let's be honest with ourselves. We are not on that level of concentration. It's more than a little above us. But we can see parallels in our own lives. Take the following example. A person comes home from work. Something happens on the train that made him furious, and he enters the door fuming. Suddenly, the telephone rings. It is a friend from out of town, with whom he had not spoken for months. The two friends begin talking and speaking for half an hour. When the commuter hangs up, he realizes that for the past half hour, he was not upset. Why? The incident that upset him took place. The telephone call did not change that. But guess what? What did the telephone call do? It helps him change the focus of his attention. While he was speaking, he was not thinking about what took place on the train. And that is why we see that certain people who endured terrible horrors, for example, people who went through the Holocaust, can nevertheless pull themselves together and rebuild their lives and their families. Many people ask me, they never told about their experiences in the Holocaust. It was only later on in life, perhaps even towards the end of their life, did they start to open up. And people often say, well, why were they doing that? Do you know why? This explains it somewhat. If they concentrate on the negativity of those thoughts, it would immobilize them, would paralyze them. But they focused on their family, rebuilding their lives, being blessed, earning, whatever. They shift their mind. They stop thinking about it. And there are others who have only to discover, for example, that they've lost their car keys, oi gewalt, and they find themselves in the midst of a crisis, the end of the world, because they're focusing on it. Move your mind away. Concentrate on something else. It has not to do so much with what happens, but how much one lets what happens affect him. And this leads to another point. There are times when we hold on to memories of an unpleasant event far longer than the event calls for. We continue thinking about it day and night and morning and evening. And guess what? As I said earlier on, thinking about it is so much and too much actually reinforces and magnifies the pain involved. So there is an alternative. What's the alternative? Once we stop thinking about it, the pain will cease. And this is where many of us make a basic mistake. Many people think that they are capable of controlling only their actions and their speech. They know that they can decide whether to do something or to refrain from doing something, whether to say something or not to say it, but they think that their thoughts are uncontrollable. Dear friends, let it be known, this is a mistake. It is true that it is harder to control thoughts. In contrast, of course, to speech or deed, thought is constant. There is not a moment in the day that when a person is not thinking. But what to think about, guess what, is subject to a person's control. That person has the ability to focus his thoughts as he or she chooses. If a person only realizes that he has the ability to stop thinking about a certain incident, he would let go. And once he lets go, he would no longer feel so much the pain and, of course, the sadness. What do we mean by letting go and turning away from the undesirable thought? Again, I refer you to the Tanya. The Alter Rebbe says that one should push away the undesirable thought with both hands. What does it mean with both hands? Implicit in these words, there are two possibilities. Pushing away a thought with one hand and pushing away a thought with both hands. What is the difference? When an incident takes place, even when it is something that we do not want to think about, it demands our attention. Naturally, our mind focuses upon it and thoughts come to the fore. We have actually three ways of relating to these thoughts. One is to accept them, to continue to think about the subject, even though we know they're undesirable. Guess what? This approach actually encourages these thoughts to return. Think of the following analogy. A person is being bothered by someone else. Another individual is constantly ringing his doorbell and asking to be allowed into the house and to be given attention. The owner of the home really does not enjoy that person's company, but he or she does not know what to do. In this case, there are three alternatives. The simplest is that when the person rings the doorbell, the host invites him into the house. The host sees no way out. He sits at the coffee table with his guest, offers him coffee and cake, and talks with him for 2 hours. Although the host did not feel comfortable, the guest did. He got the attention that he was looking for, and he got it in a welcoming, genteel manner. He surely was not discouraged from coming again. On the contrary, after being treated in such a manner, coffee and cake, it is inevitable that that guy's coming back again. But there's another possibility. The host does not allow the guest into the house. He stands by the door and he screams at the person who wants to come in, and he blocks his entry. In this case, although the guest did not enter the house, he did still receive the host's attention. The host came to the door and he talked to him. Okay, he did not speak to him nicely. He shouted, he screamed, but he gave the guest his attention. And so there is the possibility, under that circumstance, that the guest will return again to seek this attention, no matter how uncomfortable is the manner in which it was granted. But then there is a third alternative. Simply ignore the person at the door entirely. In that case, he may return once, maybe twice, maybe even 3 times, but he eventually will stop coming. Why? Because there's nothing encouraging him. He's not being acknowledged at all. The same motif will work with our undesirable thoughts. If a person accepts a thought and thinks about it, even though the thought is disturbing, guess what? He's actually reinforced that type of thought. The attention he gives this thought, the pattern encourages these thoughts to proceed continually from the subconscious to the conscious, even though they cause him discomfort. One may try to stop the thoughts, to prevent them from coming to mind, but often this means that the person is fighting himself and repeatedly telling himself not to think about these particular thoughts. But like the host shouting at the guest at the door, he's giving these thoughts attention. That is what we mean by pushing away a thought with one hand. With one hand you are pushing away the thought away, but since you are paying attention to it, even though in a negative way, you are bringing it closer to yourself with the other hand. In other words, when I'm thinking that I should not be thinking about a particular subject, I'm still paying attention to the thoughts that I do not want to encourage. I'm acknowledging these thoughts, and in so doing, I'm inviting the thoughts to proceed from my subconscious to the consciousness. But then there is the other alternative. When a thought comes to a person's mind, he can refuse to pay any attention to it. He need not make the effort to push it out of his mind. He can simply ignore it and focus his attention on a different subject altogether. And when he ignores a thought and does not acknowledge it at all, this thought pattern eventually will no longer seek his or her attention. Most people will ask, how can I think about something else? This thought keeps on coming to my mind. A person once came to the Maggid of Mezrich with this problem. My mind is always straying. How can I control my thoughts? And I have many people in shul come to Rabbi before the speech. How can I stay focused on your speech? My mind wanders outdoors. How can I control my thoughts? So the rabbi, the Maggid, says to his disciple, and says to him, go to see my disciple, Reb Zev. He'll help you. So the person journeys to see this rabbi, Rabbi Zev, and he arrives in his Yitoma at night. And only with great difficulty, he was able to locate this rabbi's house. Finally, he reaches this righteous person's home. He bangs loudly on the door, anxious to be invited in from the cold. You can imagine. He schlepped through on a wintry time over there. There was no answer. He banged again. Still no answer. Upset, he continued to bang with all of his might, but no one inside responded. Annoyed, with no alternative, he was forced to spend the night outside. In the morning, Reb Zev, the owner of the house, welcomed him inside warmly. Come tanai, shalom aleichem. The visitor told the tzaddik he had come from, he told him where he's coming from, but the Maggid had told him to come to see him. He invited him in. He took partake of his hospitality for as long as he desired. He said, you can come and stay, no problem, welcome. He was more than slightly curious at the difference between the reception and the cold shoulder that he'd been given the previous night. But in deference to the host, the tzaddik, he remained silent. He stayed at Reb Zev's home for several days, sharing talks and learning and observing from his everyday contact. But still, the visitor had one thing that bothered him. He had come with a specific intent. He had been sent by his teacher to learn how to control his thoughts. And this Reb Zev had not given him any instructions with regard to this particular matter. Talking about this, talking about that, wonderful things. But what he came for, he wasn't getting an answer. Finally, he broached the question to the tzaddik. He said, listen, I'm going to be honest with you. The Maggid sent me here for a reason. Why haven't you taught me how to control my thoughts? But I already have, says Reb Zev. He says, when? The first night you came. You banged and banged on the door to my home, trying to come in. I knew you were there, but decided not to let you enter. And I kept to that decision no matter how hard you banged. That's the secret of controlling your thoughts. It's true. This is not easy, but a person has an alternative. No one can think about two things at the same time. And so when a person forces himself to start thinking about another subject, the undesired thoughts will fade away. True, they may come back 10 minutes later, but once again the person has the alternative of controlling his thoughts and thinking of something else. The undesired thoughts may return again 20 minutes later, but again the person can think about another subject. Eventually, if the person keeps ignoring the undesirable thoughts long enough, it will cease surfacing from the subconscious to the conscious. At first, it will surface less often than before, and ultimately, it will stop surfacing altogether. To explain by an analogy, our muscles are strengthened by exercise. If we do not exercise a muscle, the muscle becomes weaker. If a person is, God forbid, bedridden for several months because of a back problem, he may have trouble walking when he finally is able to get out of bed. His ailment may not have affected the muscles of his feet, but inactivity did. We have many thoughts and experiences in our subconscious minds. When we allow them to come to the conscious level, it is like exercising a muscle. This means that in addition to the fact that we are focusing on these thoughts now, we also encouraging these thoughts to emerge continually from the subconscious. When, however, this is the point, a person does not allow a thought to surface and pushes it away with two hands, that means he ignores it entirely, he diminishes the probability of its surfacing in the future. It is possible that the thought will reoccur again, no guarantees, and perhaps many times, several times, but each time it is ignored, its tendency to recur will actually be weakened. When, by contrast, a person pushes away a thought with one hand, that means he acknowledges the thought and thinks how not to think about it, he is in fact inviting this thought. It's like a form of exercise. He allows the thought to capture his attention, and this encourages the thought to continue surfacing from the subconscious now to the conscious. A man and woman once came to a rabbi, and the woman demanded a divorce. The problem was that a husband would come home drunk and would say all sorts of unpleasant things to his wife. In response, she would scream at him. He would then throw something at her, and she would throw something else back at him. And of course, World War III would break loose almost every night. Despite the difficulties, the rabbi saw that the marriage had potential, even a lot of potential, if both people would only learn to modify their conduct. So he asked the woman to give it one more try, and he promised that if it did not work, he would make sure that divorce went through. What did the rabbi suggest? He told the woman, I have an ancient book of Kabbalah, of mysticism, that contains a remedy for a strife between a husband and his wife. He continued to give the woman detailed instructions. She was to take a bottle that holds exactly 8 ounces to the mikveh after midnight on the first day of the Jewish month, Rosh Chodesh. She should fill the bottle with water 3 times and pour out the water 3 times. Afterwards, she should fill the bottle again, wrap it in a bag so that others would not see it, and take it home. When your husband comes home, the rabbi continued, take a teaspoon of this water, do not spit it out, and do not swallow it until your husband is asleep. After much effort, the woman prepared the bottle and the water. That night, she heard her husband was coming home. From the distance, she heard that he was drunk and that he was saying very unpleasant things. Obediently, she took the water, put a teaspoon in of this water in her mouth, and held it there. Her husband walks into the house. He starts to scream, and he shouts, and he insults her. Of course, she was dying to scream back at him, but she could not. She had water in her mouth. So the husband continued to scream and shout for a half an hour. Finally, because he got no feedback, he grew tired and fell asleep. After he fell asleep, the woman hurried to spit out the water. She began to scream and shout and release all the antagonism that had been building up when he was letting loose. But it did not bother her husband. He was schnortzing, he was snoring away. He did not hear anything she said. The following day, the same thing happened. He comes home, starts to scream and shout, but she could not answer him because, why? She had water in her mouth. But this day, there was a change. He screamed and he shouted for 25 minutes, and then he fell asleep. Day after day, the scene repeated itself, and each time the husband shouted a little bit less. Soon, he shouted for only a minute or two, and after a while, he stopped shouting altogether. When the shouting stopped, they were able to communicate with each other. Once they could talk to each other, they were eventually able to start appreciating each other. Now, let me tell you off the record, was the remedy of the rabbi suggested, was it really written in Kabbalah? Not explicitly. But the point is, in Kabbalah, it does teach the virtues of forbearance. What the rabbi was saying, in essence, ignore him. Let him reach his equilibrium. And then you will see things will be able to work out. And it was successful. Why? Because by ignoring something, you discourage it entirely. The same concept applies with regard to our thoughts. The key is pushing away an undesirable thought with both hands, turning our minds to another point of focus, and letting the undesired thought flow out from our consciousness naturally without effort. Chassidus highlights the power of our minds and teaches us that the mind is the key to the emotions, just like a key with which one can either turn the engine of a car on or off. By focusing or turning off our mental attention, we can actually control our emotions. Why does a person become full of anger? Not because of what happened, but because he is thinking about what happened and concentrating on this. We have an alternative. There's no need to feed the fires. We can divert our thoughts from disturbing factor and concentrate on something else. The challenge is not to work on methods of letting out the pressure, but to be a step ahead, to work on a way to prevent the pressure from building up in the first place. And how is that done? This means disciplining our thoughts. This is a basic principle of Torah. Just as a person should discipline his actions in his speech, guess what? A person can learn to discipline their thoughts. When a person makes an effort to discipline their thoughts, eventually he will attain control over it. Take jealousy, for example. If a person sees something that another person has, and his natural reaction is to become jealous, he may not be able to change his natural response easily. What he can do is not to occupy himself with thoughts of jealousy. There he has control. He may not be able to help a jealous thought from surfacing from the subconscious to the conscious. That's a natural response. But to continue to pursue such thoughts and to dwell upon them, there's a person and must learn to exercise control. Whenever a jealous thought comes to mind, one should stop and divert his attention. The thought may return, several times in fact. Nevertheless, eventually, as one continues to exercise control, these thoughts of jealousy will become far less frequent. Ultimately, they will cease surfacing from the subconscious or coming more from that to the conscious. And the same concept applies with regards to thoughts of hatred. The Torah tells us not to hate our fellow man. But what happens if another person hurts us terribly? It is only natural for feelings of hatred to be aroused. So how can we control them? The answer is that it is indeed very difficult to change our insides so that we do not react with anger or hatred in such an instance. They may be beyond our control. Once such a thing does take place, thoughts of hatred will probably begin to surface. But here's where we should exercise control. We have the ability to stop ourselves from occupying our minds with thoughts of hatred. How can we stop ourselves? Not by pushing the hatred away with one hand, but by totally cutting it off, by switching to a different topic entirely. This prevents the feelings of hatred from being reinforced and magnified. They will not flare up, but eventually they will subside. These thoughts of hatred may continue coming back. Nevertheless, when they are ignored once, a second time, a third time, and even 100th time, they will eventually stop surfacing from the subconscious to the conscious. Many of us can look back in our past and find that when we were younger, we were obsessed with certain things. We wanted them and could not stop thinking about them. In the morning, in the afternoon, during school, during meals, at night, when we fell asleep, in our dreams, it was almost as if that's all we were, that we thought about. When we think back now, we ask ourselves, what happened? Why am I no longer obsessed with these same thoughts? What changed? Often the situation did not change, and we never had this desire actually satisfied. What then do we not continue to think about it? The answer is very simple. Several years have passed, and in the interim, we have been confronted with many new situations, new desires, new problems, and maybe even new obsessions. We have devoted so much time and attention to these new matters that we lost interest in the old ones. We paid less and less attention to them, and eventually we stopped thinking about them altogether. This is what we should do with feelings of depression and all negative thoughts. In general, we should know that everything that happens is good, and therefore a person should always be besimcha, be filled with real joy. We should internalize this idea and make it part of us. This will help us not lose our equilibrium when these undesirous things start to happen. But if someone is able to cause us to become upset, we should know that we have an alternative. That alternative does not involve meditating and how upsetting the factor is. In reality, good which is disguised. That's the way to look at it. What does that mean? A person who's very upset will not always honestly be able to come to such a realization. What we can do and what we must do, and if we want to preserve our inner balance, is to turn our attention to another subject and do so again and again until we are no longer bothered by the upsetting thought. Once we are not being controlled by our depressing thoughts, we can focus on the truth that Torah teaches. And what is that? That everything comes from God and is in essence good. There's so much to talk about this subject. For example, it also applies how to stop feeling jealous. Same ideas can be applied in that. Time doesn't allow, but there's a simple routine that you can train your mind to focus on the blessings in one's life. For example, you walk into a stunning mansion and you think, wow, I could get used to this. 6 large bedrooms, a sprawling backyard, full-time help. When you arrive back to your home, suddenly your home seems to be like a small and dingy place. The voice of jealousy whispers in your ears, they have it and you don't have it. It's easy to get caught up in idolizing the lives of those around us. Right? We say this, we say about this and about other things. Oh, if I only had this kind of wardrobe, I wanted this kind of spouse. The grass is green on the other side. We even idolize our own lives, looking back at other places or times when we think we had it all. And the same applies today. A person can overcome that. Throughout our history, we were in the best places in the wilderness with all kinds of good things, and yet people complained. There's always that wandering, letting our minds think, wandering away, and of course creates problems in a person's mind. But one of the added aspects, not only to focus away and not give any thought to these negative thoughts in any way, is to bring more gratitude in one's life. The more a person's gratitude, how do we stop this feeling of jealousness And that is, of course, appreciating what we have, to look around and say, what's the best part of the day? What made me feel grateful to Almighty God today? So, a lot to think about. I want to thank you so much. And the more we think about good things and fill our minds with positive things, especially as we prepare ourselves for the high holidays, the better we stand as we prepare ourselves for the greatest blessings in this coming new year. This is your host, Rabbi Perl, wishing you an amazing day, very happy, healthy, and sweet new year.